Welcome to the TTRPG Freelance Mentorship Program podcast series. I am Crystal Mazur. I am the host, and we are going to be talking today about Impostor Syndrome. First off, a brief overview of our series. Our goal of this series is to help those who are interested in freelancing or are curious about how freelancing works, who struggle with certain parts of freelancing, or who want to connect with other writers to kind of find a community, get some information, and find other people that they can reach out to talk about this type of stuff or listen to some of the experiences that other writers have had. Our recent episodes include a writer interview with Monica Valentinelli, as well as the writing process, where we talk about what you can expect as a writer and how that works in the grand scheme of things of writing tabletop RPGs. Today, we have our guest, Chris Handley.
Hello.
Michelle Freel.
Hi.
And Kennedy.
Ooh.
All right, on to news. All right, so I'm just going to go right down the line in our show notes. So, Chris, what's your news that you have?
Oh, there's loads. Obviously, let's start with podcast stuff, because if you're listening to this, then you mostly follow the Darker Days stream. So Mike and I recorded the latest Dark Hammer. So we covered Khorne, the Curse God Khorne, and how to play as Khornate cultists. They're not all complete psychopaths, but they are. Which means we're going to cover Slanesh soon. I am trying to get my head out of where it is right now. I'm busy with so much stuff in my day job. We will start Dark Iron, which will be the podcast series like Dark Hammer, but for the Iron Kingdom setting. Related to that, ChillCon is literally days away, literally next week, and I will be there running demos of War Machine 4th edition, which is obviously a Iron Kingdom setting war game. Also, Warhammer Fest is end of April, and I'll be at that in a non-official capacity, walking around. So say hi. That's obviously in Manchester and is UK, Manchester, UK. That's Warhammer stuff. I know Cubicle 7 are going to be there. Speaking of Cubicle 7, books that have been out recently: Threat Assessment Xenos, which is basically a bestiary book for Wrath and Glory, which I write for. Coming up soon is Eldari, Inheritance of Embers, which is a player-facing book. So it's, do you want to play Eldari? This is the book for you. Following that, coming up is Vow of Absolution, which I wrote for, which is the Absolver. Well, no, it's the player-facing Space Marine book, but with a heavy focus on the Absolver chapter, who are the poster boys, superhumans, whatever, of Space Marines in the Gilead sector. And then I did some work for Cult. I did my first piece for Cult. I've done my first bit of work, and I've handed that in for Green Ronin on something. And Nightmare Empire is about to ship to everyone. So that's the Iron Kingdoms RPG, which is basically, do you want to play undead? Yeah, okay, there you go. And coming up is the Deep Wild Kickstarter for Privateer Press for the Iron Kingdom setting. That is basically, do you want to play Gator Men? And they're no longer called Gator Men, they're Gator Folk. So we have retconned, as always, lots of stuff which were just kind of like, in previous editions, because it is an old setting. And I've written like a whole massive scenario. It's a road trip. There are Pharaoh, and the theme is ecological horror. That's it from me.
So basically, I'm giving you my paycheck from this point forward. There's so many books there that I really like. So do I just make it up to
you? No, I wish. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. Like Threat Assessment Xenos was fun because I basically got to write about Gene Stealer cults, which is kind of ick. But like having to do it tastefully, yeah.
I can imagine, because I know there are going to be people listening to this who don't play Warhammer who are like, "Why is it ick?" And then just don't Google it if it's not something you're into. I think Chris will do a great job though of making it better. but just so you know. But that's a lot of really awesome stuff. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a mental last 6 months.
Michelle, about some news from you.
I have a lot less news. So I have a erotic romance alter pseudonym, and my latest book, In His Tendrils, just came out at the beginning of March for that. And then I freelance for Wet Ink Games, and our Psychic Kids RPG is on Kickstarter right now. You play kids in the 90s with psychic powers escaping from the Institute and trying to find a safe place.
I have been following some of the mechanics discussions on that, and I am so looking forward to seeing how that works with the +1 system.
We always try with each game, we try to add new uses for the system. So it'll be interesting.
I'm very much looking forward to that. And congratulations on your romance novel too. That's always awesome to see and get to promote. So Kennedy.
All right. So I've also had a really busy last couple of months. We're just wrapping work on the My Little Pony Friendship is Magic roleplay game. Super excited for that. I think it's going to be really clever, and it's definitely one of those games where I will guarantee you everyone will have fun when you play it. I've even seen people who are like dyed in the wool D&D players who just go nuts with it. But I've also been working on Power Rangers and the book A Jump in Time, which covers time traveling in the Power Rangers universe. That'll be coming out sometime in the next 3 months. And then over with Star Trek Adventures, we just wrapped Utopia Planitia. That's already out to people. And that covers starships and how you can make the starship just as much a character in the party as each individual player. And then over with independent stuff, I've also worked with Wet Ink Games recently. Heckin' Good Doggos is out to backers, and I got to see it at PAX Unplugged, so that was really cool. And then Stage Terrorism, which is me and Mike Myler's tribute to Venture Brothers, it's doing pretty well. So if you want a game about, failing forward, is the best way to describe it, I definitely recommend checking it out. And then upcoming, I'm going to be the gaming guest of honor for In Conjunction in July.
Congratulations.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm excited. That was actually my first convention.
Awesome. Okay, and then for me, personal news, Cool Name Goes Here RPG, which is on Kickstarter, has funded, is done, and we are going to be starting work on it in the next couple of weeks. And that is through Mark Tassin and his company. It is actually going to be, once we are done developing it, it is going to be put out as a free OGL for anybody who wants to use it within the community. And that's going to be in perpetuity. We cannot take that back once it's done. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Mark comes up with and helping him kind of develop that into a really cool system that you can put a whole bunch of different genres into, which is very similar to what I do with the PIP system. And so with the PIP system, we are going to be with our next primer in the next couple of weeks, and I will be hiring on for another primer run on that. If you are listening to this and you are interested, please reach out to me so I can get you the form to fill out, because I keep everyone's information, and I will send you that form. You can get my contact information at the end, and I will have it attached to this podcast. Black Ballad, which is through Storyteller Forge Games, publishing company, that is on Kickstarter currently. It has funded. I did the design work for the Purgatory Poker, and hopefully we'll be writing some of the stretch goals or writing further within the world. There's plans for other things on there, but it's very exciting to be working on that as well. And then as far as conventions coming up, I have GaryCon in the next couple of days. This is probably actually going to be after this episode's going to come out after I've been at GaryCon. Hopefully before I get to C2E2 though, I will be at both of them. So if you are going to be in the area for either of those, then reach out. If you see me at a con, please feel free to say hi. We're going to move on to our main topic then. Okay, so I'm going to actually have everybody introduce themselves and how they got into gaming or freelancing, and anything else that they kind of want to talk about that you feel is important for understanding like your connection to imposter syndrome and stuff like that. So to start, for me personally, I got asked to write a kids scenario for a open license game called First Fable, and I wrote a haunted house scenario for Halloween, and that kind of got me in touch with the person who hired me on for Pip System, which is Aloy Lasanta. And he hired me on for that. And from there, it kind of steamrolled into a whole bunch of different things. And my personal connection with imposter syndrome is that I feel it all the time because I don't come from a writing background. I come from an education background. And while I'm good with math and stuff like that, I always feel like I love writing mechanics and stuff, but I always feel like I do it wrong. I always feel like I get noticed when I shouldn't be noticed. It's kind of like I have this weird connection with imposter syndrome that I want to talk about a little bit further on. But yeah, so it's something that I continue to struggle with. Who would like to go next?
I'll jump in then. Oh god, I mean, if everyone's been listening to Dark Days long enough, then obviously that's part of the story. I mean, that goes all the way back to knowing up Dark Days Radio and podcasting. And I guess in this day and age, streaming is a good way of showing that you know a game or a setting so that you will get noticed. That's how I got into writing for Privateer Press. But really, my first writing gig was kind of similar, and that was through, again, being on the right forums, knowing the setting well enough, and that's when I got hired for by who was it at the time? Red Brick Publishing. So they became FASA 2.0, essentially. And I got hired to write and co-design. This wasn't an RPG. This is a war game. Noble Armada Third Edition, which is uses the setting of the Fading Suns RPG. So that's a huge amount of mechanics. And yeah, imposter syndrome turns up a lot because, again, like Crystal, I don't come from a writing background. I am previously been an academic, scientist, and then there's plenty of imposter syndrome in that field. And then now as a senior software engineer in commercial software design, again, there's plenty of imposter syndrome there that I have. And I guess the biggest kind of case example, which we can get into of where I've had imposter syndrome, is when I was interviewing Andy Chambers and we were chatting about Battlefleet Gothic, and he just released Drop Fleet Commander, which again is another spaceship battle game. And there's me going like, nuts. Is mine even going to compare? Like, what am I doing? Yeah.
Yeah, like it's always weird to come into writing from someplace else, right? Like, especially like coming from the academic, or like I'm a teacher, and even teachers get imposter syndrome, especially when they feel like they can't teach their kids, or their kids aren't learning. So yeah, I feel that so much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, who would like to go next?
I will.
Okay.
So I'm coming at it from the opposite direction. I spent 10 years trying to become a horror writer, and going through the slog of learning how to market, learning how to court agents, having a couple of magazines and such, a couple publications there, and just not getting very much headway. So I spent a lot of time with imposter syndrome there because horror, of course, is very much a old white boy network, and that still is true in many cases. Um, and when they resoundingly say that they don't really want your input, that you're a woman, you should go write girly stuff, that wears on you. So I had pretty much stopped trying for a while when I ran into Brandon, literally at the grocery store. I had went to high school with him. He runs Wedding Games. And he pretty much said, "Oh, I've been meaning you still do writing, right?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And he's like, "Well, I want you to write something for me." And of course I figured, well, this is not the kind of thing I usually write. There's no way he's going to want what I produce here. I understand. I have the opposite of you, Crystal. I don't like the numbers when it comes to writing systems. I like the more creative writing aspect, and when it comes to the numbers, I'm like, I don't know. Um, so that leads to a lot of when you're telling me, hey, I need you to come up with this new concept, this new way to use these dice. I'm like, I'm not smart enough for that. I'm just not. But that he introduced me to more people like you, and that led me to just feeling more at home in the freelancing and the role playing world than I ever felt in the genre world.
Brandon has a way of reaching out to people and pushing them to get more and more creative. I'll give him that. At some point I will have Brandon on over here to talk about stuff for wedding games and stuff like that. So he is hopefully coming up soon with our scheduling program. So all right, Kennedy.
Um, yeah, just I started writing back in college. I still remember the days when we had to mail in our submissions, which is just that was a lot of shipping, a lot of postage notes. It's just it's weird to imagine how things have changed in 20 years. I've always loved writing. My mom was a teacher, so she would frequently take away TV and computer time, and then she would always encourage us to be like, okay, you can play outside. I'd be like, oh, but we can't do anything outside. It's raining. Oh, why don't you write a story? Why don't you do this? And just when I got to college, people just kept telling me that they liked my work. So I thought about the one thing that got me out of my shell as a kid and made me really passionate to learn, and that was role playing games. And from there, I just started reaching out to people who were having open calls, and I started just applying myself and trying. And yeah, it's funny because we're talking about imposter syndrome, and it's weird because I get to work on some really cool properties, which is really awesome. But then there are just times when I'll just hear something, I'll be like, oh, I wish I was on that. And it's like, oh, but you can't. You're too busy with these amazing things. But in my brain, I'm going, yeah, but I could add a fifth or a sixth project to March. I could do that, right? And the answer is no. But it really is just one of those things where, as a 20-year veteran of this industry, um, it still hits. And there are ways to deal with it. There's ways that I cope with it that I'll share with the audience. But then there are just times when, even after I've had some successes, my brain, the greedy part of my brain is always like, yeah, but we could have more. And then the other part of my brain that's very full of anxiety and everything is like, we can't have more. We suck. And so it's a very common occurrence, and it's a constant demon that everybody's going to be contending with throughout their careers.
Yeah, I actually you helped me through one of my biggest imposter syndrome moments. That was at the Ennies in 2018.
Oh, yeah.
where like where we knew we were getting an award, like it had already been given us because it was a judge's award. It wasn't even one of the voting ones. And I was like, no, I don't deserve to be here. And you were like, nope, you absolutely do. You need to, be right here, and you're going to go up and you're going to talk and you're going to accept this award. And yeah, it so
I still remember the look of surprise on your face because it was tradition with Third Eye Games where if we ever won an award, I would splurge and get everybody a medal if you showed up to the innings. And I remember you were on stage, had your picture taken, and I was just like, "Hey, Crystal, you forgot something. I just flung this medal at you from across the room," which I think I should have waited till I had your attention fully, because I think I just pelted you with a piece of metal out of nowhere.
I saw it coming out of the corner of my eye. I might have been blinded by lights for a little bit, but yes, no, I did see it coming. Okay, so we've all kind of talked about experiencing imposter syndrome. So, like, let's define it, because like it can mean different things to different people. But overall, there is cohesion to it. It's just a matter of putting it into words. So, who would like to try to take a stab at it and kind of get this discussion going on here?
I can go initially because I just literally brought up the Wikipedia definition and I was like looking at this and I was like, oh, okay, because like I think if I can definitely say it initially from like an academic point of view, because perhaps that's the place where, of all places, you're mostly going to feel it. Perhaps in that environment, you might feel it like really. It's a very visceral feeling, and from that we can mostly extrapolate it in freelance writing and in gaming. So yeah, imposter syndrome, apparently, the definition via Wikipedia is the psychological occurrence in which people doubt their skills, talents, and accomplishments, and have a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as frauds. And I think even that single sentence at the top of the article in Wikipedia contains a lot. Now, I think that last bit of being exposed as frauds is the thing where I say that is what I mean as being a very tangible feeling, at least from my academic background, because I think when you're making a product, right, and it goes out in the world and people buy it, they should buy it. And if you're working on established products, you're kind of sharing the load on that kind of feeling. That I find personally a bit easier to deal with rather than in academia from an academic background, because when you write a paper which explains your latest finding and your theories and your explanations of it, it goes out into the world and it hits peer review. And peer review is literally someone coming along and going, you know what you've said? That's crap. Have you done this? You should have done this. That's not right. And then that is literally someone basically going, you're rubbish. And there are people out there people in that entire field, that experience, that they get a kick out of doing that as well. And it's one thing to write a paper, then it's another thing to go to a conference and present your results. And you have no idea that the people may have reviewed your paper. They are in the audience, ready to take you out. They are assassins with the word professor at the start of their names. And then you might want to apply for some funding because you want to be an independent researcher and your work's going to be reviewed. And now it's even worse, because it's not just you putting out your work to go, this is what I discovered. That's cool. I've contributed to the body of science out there. They're going to go around and go, oh, that's a very good idea. You've done all that work, but we don't think it deserves any money. Or we don't think you should be researching that. So that is where my experience of it is at its like worst. Fortunately, I would say it feels sometimes a bit less in gaming, but again, there are times, this has happened working on privately oppressed stuff, where I'm not really the most experienced person with 5e, and there are fans out there who know the systems backwards and forwards, and of course you've written the wrong bloody rules for something, and they are going to let you know. But there are ways of dealing with it. So that's where I hope that gives some examples of how I've come across, imposter syndrome, and in a very direct way. And I'm sure people have similar feelings and experiences.
Yeah, definitely. I know that in the fiction writing, in the publishing world, there's actually two tiers of people. There's writers and then there's readers. And readers read a lot of books and like a lot of different things and are open to a lot of new things. But writers, they get stuck in this idealization of the successful writers that came before. And then you find yourself getting sucked into this entire mind twisting if I'm not as winning these certain awards, if I'm not being published by these certain magazines, these certain publishers, then I'm not actually worth anyone paying attention to. I'm really glad to have not found that same thing in the role playing world.
Like, well, I've never had to present anything in front of a room full of people with like professor in front of their name. Although I will say, Professor Assassin and Doctor Assassin just sounds incredible. So I'm just saying, I'm probably gonna steal that for a book in the future. Um, but no, it can, even on a small scale, like it can be anxiety inducing trying to share your work with people. Um, I remember one of the most harrowing moments of my career was going to one of my nephew's career days and trying to explain to kids, and adults in the room, but it's like, well, yeah, I make board games, but it's not just playing pretend. Yes, it is a real job. People did pay me for it, and kids just would constantly be like, "Oh, did you work on Fortnite? You didn't work on Fortnite. Oh, so you wasted your time, basically." Which is what one of the kids said to me, and the kid was like 10. So, um, and that can hurt because at first you laugh it off and you tell people and everyone laughs, but then at night you're lying in bed, and you're just going, "Man, there's a 10-year-old out there. Don't really know his name, didn't catch it, thinks I'm kind of bad at what I do." Well, if a 10-year-old thinks that, then there's probably 11, 12, 25, 30-year-olds every age that doesn't like what I do. And that's kind of where like you trip yourself up the most because it's all these imaginary audiences, the imaginary auditorium full of all the people who don't like your work in theory, and then your brain starts to replace these faceless figures with like colleagues, family members, friends. And so then it's sort of like, you know what, if a 10-year-old doesn't think that I do that great of a job, well, I bet Brandon with Wedding Games, one of my closest friends, by the way, I bet he thinks I suck. And your brain just, especially if you have anxiety like I do, your brain will just go in circles and your stomach will just turn itself in knots just because you created this entire field of people who don't like you. And, in the day of the internet, people will let you know they don't like your work pretty quickly. Um, 1-star reviews and bad Reddit threads and everything. They're very common. But I think it's the people that we make up in our own heads. And it's not a bad thing. Like, you always should try to think of what your audience will think. But sometimes you just can't help but think about that your audience is just automatically going to hate you no matter what you do.
Yeah, I think that sometimes when we are perceived as bigger than we actually feel, that's where it hits me the hardest because and it happened to me recently with when Cool Name RPG dropped and they announced that we were all of the developers that were consulting on there, and a whole bunch of people were like, "Oh my god, that's like an amazing lineup of people." And in my head I'm like, yeah, everyone on there except for me is really awesome. And Like I just automatically deleted myself out of that conversation because I didn't want to be placed on that pedestal in my brain, or like I didn't believe I should have been placed on that pedestal. And it was really like, and it was a personal thing for me. I did like put a stat, like talk a little bit about it as like a personal thing. Like this was something that I just personally wrestled with. And it was, and like I didn't place the burden of that on anybody else. But yeah, like just trying to even like figure out like what a definition is without actually looking it up is really hard, because you're like, I feel like a fraud, or I feel like I don't belong here. But why or the how or anything like that is really, really hard to put a finger on.
No, I was gonna say, I think a lot of it as is because we move the goalposts on ourselves. So we accomplish something, but since we did it, then that means anybody else could do it. Um, my day job is at a veterinary clinic, and I do a lot of blood drawing, tubing animals, performing procedures like dental scalings and stuff like that. And I still to this day sit down sometimes and ask myself, how many blood draws do I have to do before I feel like I'm actually a professional at this? Like, because I do it, it must be easier than other people realize, because I couldn't do it if it was difficult.
I get that a lot too, where it's kind of like, I don't know, I'll write something. Like recently with like My Little Pony, we've been doing a lot of adventures and a bunch of cool books are on the horizon. And Renegade moves at a swift pace. And then there are times when I'll sit in the room and I'll contribute ideas, but then I'll be like, it's like, oh, I'm here because I've tricked my way here, or I'm in this room because I've surrounded myself with really, really nice people and they needed a filler, so I'm the filler. But you know what? I would just nod, smile politely, and they all want me here because we're friends, but I'm the one that's really holding the team back.
I think the worst thing which hit me recently, and I think this ties into, it's when you set your goalposts is also about how you're comparing yourself to other people, because part of imposter syndrome is also realizing what the route that other people are to get to the same stage. And sometimes that's realizing that some people just cheated at life by having a lot of cash to mess around and dabble, and that's how they get into that. Or in this day and age of social media where oh, they're a writer, how come they're writing and they're also doing this thing as streaming, and they're also apparently also an actor, and they're also doing a podcast, and they're doing this, that, and the other. You're like thinking, because in this day and age, personality apparently counts more than the ability of skill and being professional and delivering things on time. And I often have to reflect on that thing of what we see in gaming, and I think and then I go back to it in academia. It's like, if you did half the crap of what people do in the gaming circles, you would get sacked on the spot and you would be ostracized. No one would want to work with you because you could be actually quite good at what you do, but if you're awful to work with, that's not happened. So part of how I reconcile imposter syndrome in gaming, at least, is to think about, or at least in creative endeavors, is often thinking about, well, they kind of, how they got there is not, you have to understand that not everyone's process of getting there is the same. Some people have been through even more than you have to get to that stage, and some people have done very little and somehow are getting thrown every opportunity. But what happened to me, which drove it home and I had to reflect on it, was that and this gets really close to the bone, and it's like, because it's like related to previous relationships, and the said person is involved with someone that I used to be involved with, and they used to at one point write on a certain game line, series of games which I'm now involved in, but they don't write anymore. And it was on a conversation on Facebook, and it was about that book, and he went, it's a bit over the top, I don't really like it, I'm just going to rewrite it all. And I was like, for a minute, I was like, so you're basically saying what I worked on was crap, even though I work with someone who in gaming circles is a legend who was on that book. And then I thought for a bit, well, you didn't work on it. When was the last time you put a book out? I work with a team. It's a team effort. Yeah. So what? You know, it's just like you have to kind of look at that response and then push yourself away and realize that what you do is actually with a team, and you wouldn't be in that team if they didn't want you in the first place. So yeah, that's the thing. You have to look at it that way. And once you do all that, you go like, yeah, okay, it's still good. If they didn't like it, that's one voice out of how many? Get out of my face. I've got better things to do.
I was going to refer to you too. I was going to say, like Kennedy was saying earlier, with having anxiety, you see people who are just naturally good at writing. Sometimes when it comes to fiction, I can just sit down and just get in that zone and write. But when it comes to writing game stuff and having to put mechanics and play in somebody else's sandbox, sometimes I sit down and I'm looking at the screen and I'm like, I know where I want to go with this, but I'm convinced that nobody else is going to like it. So sometimes a good portion of the effort is just sitting down and getting started on it. And you see people, or you even know times when you yourself hit that stride and you're really good at writing. And then you're like, I must not actually be a good writer if I'm sitting here struggling with the anxiety of just getting started.
Yeah, and it can be tough. Like, I think one of the other things that we have to like kind of reconcile when you get into any industry is that there's going to be people who advance faster than you in a shorter amount of time. That's there's no like ifs, ands, or buts. It's going to happen. And I know that our brains will always create the most, you know, I mentioned worst case scenarios earlier. We've talked a lot about anxiety. I think anxiety is very common with like writers because we always imagine ourselves in other people's heads. So we kind of take on their burdens too. And while I've never had to run from a dragon, I've certainly imagined how terrifying that would be. But there's always going to be people who, and I'm just putting that very bluntly, they're going to do better than you. That does not mean you suck. That is the key takeaway. And I actually thank like my therapist for getting me to realize that after many years. And we always like to imagine it's for the pettiest, dumbest reasons. Like my brain will immediately go, oh, of course they did well. Well, they're friends with the owner of that company. That's how they got that project. That's why you get that project. And then I have to check myself because then I'm like, oh, so I'm creating I don't know if you swear on the show, but a crappy reason in my own head. And I'm denigrating someone who probably worked really, really hard. Like my brain just immediately said, oh, they didn't hustle. I hustle. They can't possibly have hustled. They can't possibly be better at this than I am. And also, even like I just caught myself right now. I always measure things by metrics when it's like, oh, so they're a better writer than me. That's what you're saying. And I hope when I say these words, it's not just me exposing my inner petty demons, because that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm hoping that there's going to be someone who hears this and goes, hey, you know what? I've also had the same negative thoughts, and it's very common. There are going to be people out there who are genuinely bad people, and they do advance pretty far. And our industry has seen, a lot of them. Every industry does. But the truth is that there's just some people out there where maybe they hit their great hit, and that's awesome. And then you get to enjoy a really awesome role playing game. Like when we were talking earlier, like Chris is just talking about all the projects that he's on. I wasn't joking. Those are all like probably like when they all release, those are going to be like really high my wish list of things to buy. So I can't say there's an easy solution for that either. And I assure you, my advice for this entire podcast is not going to be there's no hope, there's no cure. Deal with it.
Sorry, Kelly. What you were just saying about the hustle and everything and that, and I think, and this relates to coming back to my experience in academia and being like, well, why didn't I get this far along in the career, and why haven't I finally, why did I never get the funding and the papers out to get my independent research group together so I could be a lecturer? And I look back on that now and go, I'm glad I'm not actually, because of the stress. But the point is that you realize this from a science in sciences for sure is there is a huge amount of luck in this. Like you have to realize that opportunities, there's an element of you're good at it. There's an element of the right people. There's an element of you had the right starting point in what you were doing. Like you had the opportunities already. You already had the hardware to do it. You were already embedded in it in the right way, so that it was like an easy fit. So you fell into it and you just do it. But there's also just, and related kind of to that, is just pure luck. Like you can, and this is the thing, like with applying to write for like Onyx Path. I think I applied like 3 times and I had open calls since. Oh, I guess it would go all the way back to about 2009, and then finally I get to write on a V5 book, and then for Changeling the Lost, and it's like, yeah, it does eventually happen, but that took ages. But then I compare to other companies, and it's literally like I rock up to their table at UK Games Expo, talk their ear off, and they're like, right, you're going to work on Wrath and Glory, and I'm like, okay, there's a huge amount of luck in this, that you have to realize that both yourself will hopefully enjoy, but also others enjoy as well, and that just, some people just get to roll the dice a lot. And as we know, a lot of people roll the dice a lot and they push their luck, and things fall apart, and you realize that there was an element of believing their own crap that kind of took over.
And they could be the most like mediocre person, but they just have the most self-confidence and just ride that wave. And then there are other people who are really brilliant at what they do, and then their own demons kind of tear them down, where like they let their anxiety build and build and build, and then they're like, oh, I'm never going to release this game. You know what? I shouldn't release this game because it's awful. And it's like, that game could be amazing. We'll never know until it gets into people's hands. And it's, yeah, and luck is also a good way to describe it. And it's not to say that people won't have good luck. I like to believe that everybody's, best chance is always around the corner. Yeah, that also explains why, some people, they just do so well. It's a lot of factors. It's the jealousy will just eat you alive if you let it. And there are times when I've let it. And it's really just something that you have to work on, and you have to accept that day one of getting in this industry, you're not going to get to work on like Call of Cthulhu or Dungeons and Dragons. You might really want to, and that might be where you get to someday, but it's incredibly unlikely, barring certain circumstances, to get to do that. And it doesn't mean that you're bad. It just means that you've kind of got to put work into it. And for some people, it's maybe a few years, and then they're rocking out with like the Onyx Path crew at a convention. Or it could be, it took 15 years and I just published my first book. But that's kind of like the beauty of our industry anyways, where, it's a never say no. It's not, if you've never created a game in the first year, you should just exit the industry in disgrace. It's more, no, just maybe it's just going to take a little bit more time. And then when it finally comes for you, it's going to be just really awesome.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about this industry is that overall, it feels like a lot of people within the industry actually feel imposter syndrome at one point or another. And there was a couple years ago where I was having a conversation, I think it was with Craig Campbell, where he was talking about imposter syndrome and how he was feeling it. He's like an amazing game designer. If you have not purchased or looked into his books, please do so, because damn, some of his stuff, especially Good Strong Hands. Oh my god, that book hits hard. That game itself hits hard. But he was talking about how he feels imposter syndrome every once in a while, and that's because he's isolated. A lot of freelancers, unless you work for Paizo or WotC, you actually work from home. You work remotely. You do not work in a building. You do not work full time. It is very rare for places to actually have you in a physical location together. Paizo and WotC are the two that I know that are the most prevalent. I think I want to say Darrington Press is also one that has some physical, like a physical building, but that's because it's Critical Role. And they have a, multi-million-dollar budget for stuff like that.
I think Cubicle 7 has a fairly large office these days, and so if you're a full-time employee, then and you're going to be in there play testing. Yeah.
So most of the time you're working alone. You're working at home, and the only time that you're meeting with people is on Zoom or over Discord or whatever the case may be. And you may be working during hours where everyone is sleeping, especially if you're working in a different time zone than where the developer of the book is. And that happens with like Cubicle 7 over here, or with you guys and anything over here. It seems to be a more prevalent thing within our industry. It also is something that I think we actually talk about more. I think the biggest thing in general with people with imposter syndrome is that a lot of people don't talk about it. So I actually looked up, there aren't actually a lot of studies on imposter syndrome to begin with. It's something that has just been starting to be investigated in an actual clinical sense. There was a study done in the 70s about it, and they said that women saw more imposter syndrome, specifically when they worked outside of the home. And that kind of tracks with the time and everything that was happening with the women's movement and all of that stuff. But the thing that they found out with some of the later ones, there's an article published in 2020, and in it said that anywhere between 9% to 82% of people have felt imposter syndrome at one point or another in their own personal lives or at home or in work. Sorry,
That's
not at home.
massive
in work.
error bars.
I know, right? So I have a sneaking suspicion that a lot of people actually don't understand what imposter syndrome actually is. And they may feel like their inadequacy, like feeling inadequate in something, is actually imposter syndrome. So, like, some of these statistics are just really wild. Some of them talk about how women actually don't have imposter syndrome. It's just people continue telling them that they can't do things and that we shouldn't be calling it imposter syndrome. And so, like, there's a lot of conflicting information when it comes to this.
I mean, I was going to say that's interesting. I mean, that's obviously an element which I guess we haven't touched on much in this, is that within imposter syndrome and about how you feel with your capabilities, there's a whole mess of things linked in this to do with where you are with regards to gender, class, ethnicity, all those things. Like, again, and that comes back into when I said, like, I think it's the classic lines out of Gravity Falls where it's like Dipper says that Pacifica Northwest is like, she's cheating her life, she's rich. But that's the thing, it's like there's so many elements which you have to disentangle when you're comparing yourself to other people. And this is actually, and that's really important, because if you're trying to, you shouldn't get into a rat race on this type of stuff, because, don't think your way of succeeding is a race to the bottom, because we don't need that in our industry. No. Don't do that. Do not accept being paid 2 cents a word. Tell them to go jump. And the other thing in this is, what was I going to say? Is also don't take on too much work. Like literally, like if taking on loads of books, you think writing is you think, oh, that's the way to the top. That's a quick way of creating a lot of crap content that people, and therefore you're not going to get rehired for things. I mean, and then if you've got a day job, well, then, you got to balance with that. So I'm almost at the point where I go, I don't want to work on things because I'd rather work on something else and do that well and get paid more for doing less. And that's what we all want to do. We want to be paid more for doing less, but
I don't know. Like I said earlier, there are times when I'm just like, no, I want to do all of it. Learn the hard way. You were very correct.
Yeah, but you can't. It is impossible to do everything. So you need to pick and choose your fights to be the best.
It's hard to set your goals realistically, though, because you're looking at you're coming into this forum and you're like, oh well, who's successful in my mind? Well, Dungeons and Dragons is successful. I mean, in the genre world, Stephen King's successful, but you really can't compare yourself to those people.
Yeah, like I feel like talking more about it is actually going to be helping people, because the reason why people don't talk about it is because they don't think they have it. And I think if you are naming it as imposter syndrome, you can name it as imposter syndrome as long as you need to. And if you realize eventually that it may not actually be imposter syndrome, it could be something else, that's okay to switch over to that and to go down that line of thinking. This is a very, very personal thing for a lot of people. And the reason why we're doing it in an open conversation is because I'm very open about this. I've had multiple conversations across my social media about it. And so I'm very comfortable talking about it. And I want others to be comfortable to reach out if they're feeling this and they feel the need to be able to connect to a community that does have it. And that they can see that they're not alone.
Well, that's like what I was saying earlier. Like I hope that people hear our stories and they realize that I want it to be personal to them. I want them to actually be like, I want them to feel like they fit in. And it's not just fitting in when the times are good, it's fitting in when the times are bad too. So I hope that people can look at it and they can just be like, oh, you know what? Hey, the Crystal doubts herself sometimes, but Crystal does amazing work. So maybe I am just like Crystal in that maybe, I do amazing work and I do doubt myself and I just have to keep at it.
I think that it's especially with how exposed everything is nowadays on social media. I think it's a double-edged sword, but the good side of the sword is you can have more understanding of other people's writing process. And when other people are like, yeah, I feel like an imposter, you're like, oh, me too. Maybe I'm not an imposter. Maybe that's a normal part of this process of learning and growing and establishing a career.
Definitely.
I think one of the big things about talking about imposter syndrome too is also making it clear how you want other people to respond. Like, do you need support in that moment? Are you just venting? Do you want sympathy or empathy? Do you want affirmation? I feel like making it clear too what you need while you're having that discussion is also going to make it less awkward for people to engage in that conversation as well.
I think as you start to have some success, it's important to talk about that as well, because you're reaching down and telling other people, I also, learn through what I have had to go through. That this is a normal part of developing that skill, dealing with your own doubt.
And it never really gets easier. I mean, you learn new ways to cope with it, but you'll still get your own knees will cave out from under you if you just don't take care of yourself. And really, that's also some of the best advice I can give somebody is be gentle with yourself. Like if you need a break from writing, take a break from writing. If you don't feel like something is working when you're putting like pen to paper, step away for a few hours. Actually, we talked about Stephen King earlier, and one of the best pieces of advice that I learned from him because I got to see him speak once was that it was like got like 20 or 30 years ago now. He was struggling because he had released all these great hits, and he was doing the Dark Tower series, And that was a really big introspective work of his, going back and looking at his earlier works and making this fantasy setting. And he was starting to hit a grind where he knew the story, he knew what he wanted, but he couldn't get it out there. And he just turned to one of his old friends for advice. And his friend said, "Have you tried writing something new?" And Stephen laughed, but apparently he then was like, "Well, maybe I'm going to just take a brief break and I'm just going to work on something that I really, really, want to try to be good at, and then maybe it'll work out." However, he learned very quickly that the thing he wanted to work on, he was not good at. And he would not elaborate further until he got to the end. He said that when people go through his mansion after he's long passed, they're going to open up his desk and they're going to find pages upon pages of poetry, romantic poetry. And they're going to realize that it was just Stephen King. Apparently, his forte is not romantic poetry. But he learned very quickly that if he tried to force himself to write something different, he would start to have ideas and daydreams. And instantly storylines started to correct themselves in his head, and he got inspiration for going back and writing whole new chapters that helped move the book forward. And sometimes you really do need to step out of what you're trying to do and look at it objectively, and then just remove your brain from the problem for a second. And the next thing you know, your brain will just get so bored, essentially. It'll be like, man, I'm just not good at love poetry, but I am really good at writing this, this, and this. So sometimes a break's good.
Break doesn't necessarily have to be like a break from productivity or a break from writing. I started out with horror, and when I got frustrated with that, I started writing romance because that was fun to read. And now sometimes I genre hop because each thing invigorates me in a different way.
So, okay, so we've kind of defined what imposter syndrome means for us. And I want to talk just briefly about comparing it with something else that a lot of other people do experience, which is rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or RSD. It happens a lot with individuals who have ADHD and or autism, and it happens also with a whole bunch of other conditions as well. It's when you experience a severe emotional pain because of something that you see as a failure or feeling of being rejected. And this is a little bit different than imposter syndrome. It can be supported in somewhat similar ways. So if you do suffer from this, please know that some of this advice will help. Not all of it. You can also experience both of them at the same time. That is also a valid thing that happens. So I just want to talk a little bit briefly about the differences between the two, because I will say, like, my imposter syndrome, I don't actually feel like an emotional pain with it. I feel like a loneliness, or I feel like I need to hide or something like that, but it's not like an emotional pain. And it's not a complete outright rejection. So I kind of want you guys to kind of have a little bit of input in this. If you do actually have RSD, if you are comfortable sharing, you are welcome to do that. If you don't, that's okay too. But I just wanted to kind of touch upon this because this can also be something that someone may think is imposter syndrome, but it is something a little bit different. So
I feel like an important part of imposter syndrome is I am not skilled enough for this. I am not experienced enough. I do not have the education for this.
No, that I sympathize with that a lot. We're just at times where I'm just not sure. And, I think I kind of revealed my anxiety's creative process earlier with imagining fields of people, fictional people, and possibly real people who don't like my work. But it's tough. Like, just being really honest for a second, like I've had just a breakdown in the middle of writing where it'll be like 2 a.m. The deadline is like the next day. I've written like 5,000 out of 10,000 words, and I can do a sizable amount of word count in a day. But now it's the last day to work on it, and I never want to be that writer that sends in my stuff at 11:59 p.m. on the day that it's due, because it feels like that's like a rule you're cheating somehow. Um, but yeah, it's so hard because you always like at those moments things just build up for me, and I'll notice that, like, especially when I start to get to what I call like tap happy, when I'm just like writing out words and I'm just trying to like complete sentences, and I'm like, okay, 75 more words, and I've reached a full like 6,000, and then I'm just typing like, the pony jumped over the goal, and everyone was happy, and everybody said, "Good job, pony! You jumped over the pole." And it's just, I think what might help with people is also just like remember the good parts about what you're doing. I mean, I know like my brain can very easily go from hot and cold. For people who haven't heard of my work before, I have bipolar, so for me, my emotions can literally go like high and low at the same second. Have you ever been crying and laughing? Very weird sensation, but I think something that really helps me and that might help other people, especially dealing with imposter syndrome and rejection sensitivity syndrome, is just try to inflate your own ego. I know that like it seems like, especially here, I mean, it seems like we've got a really good group of people where like, we're all pretty confident with what we do, but we're not out here going, well, I've written the best book on role playing as My Little Pony ever. It's a whole team of awesome people who worked on it. But maybe just sit down and maybe try to look at your work from the other perspective. Maybe be like, you know what? I'm great. This is great. This is going to be awesome. I'm so excited to show this. I can't wait for the editor to give me feedback on it. And you know what? I bet the person who buys this in the local store, they're going to love it too. And sometimes, we all joke about faking it till you make it. Sometimes you really do just have to fake it in your head internally. And obviously, don't let it become a lifestyle. I mean, don't become the gamer bro that's talking crap about other people's work and only talking about the good parts of your work. But sometimes, maybe just for a hot second, assume that you're your parallel universe self. Like with Star Trek, the mirror universe. Imagine you put on your best gold sash and your very stylish hip dagger and be like, you know what? No, I am great. And this is going to be great. Everyone's going to be excited. And sometimes that also helps me. Sometimes just being like, hey, I'm reasonably competent. This will be the most reasonably competent book I've ever worked on. Sometimes that's enough. And then I'm able to just calm down, look at it, and be like, no, like I will get this done. And then boom. Will that always work? Will that work for everyone? No. Like I said, there's always a million outside factors, but sometimes you just, it's nice to pretend. Like it's nice to sit down and relive the moments when like winning a judge's choice Emmy. Sometimes I relive those moments and I'm like, no, I am really good. I am really great. And I know that probably sounds horrifically like egotistical, but sometimes I've just got to let myself pretend, because if I don't, then my internal demons will just be like, they'll just keep kicking me on down. And I think that's actually kind of a really healthy expression at times, to look in the mirror and say, hey, no, I am great. And obviously, don't let it become self-destructive. Don't let it be your personality. I've seen a lot of people in the gaming industry who kind of come in as like a character, and they never stop being the character, and that character gets really obnoxious after a certain point. But just if you ever doubt yourself, just always be like, hey, I'm great, and I guarantee you that 9 times out of 10, that answer will always be correct, and that you are great, and you should be here. And I remember actually when you mentioned Craig earlier. I remember when he mentioned how someone told him he had no career in game design, and that blew my mind, because I thought, is this the same Craig Campbell we're talking about, where Craig's got like a whole bunch of really cool games? He made a bunch of little tiny games too that like emulate famous TV shows. Like I played a one shot of What We Do in Shadows using his little vampire game, which name I'm blanking on. I'm sorry, Craig. Everybody go to Craig's website or drive through. You can find Craig's work, but it's a fun game and it captures the plot of What We Do in Shadows extremely well. And it's just amazing how in this industry we can just tell people who have a lot of potential that they're not great. And yeah, just it's a struggle. Like, especially when you see your friends, like, like I have a lot of anxiety when people pick on Craig, and then I'm like, oh no, you will not pick on Craig. Die Laughing is a tremendously fun game. And it's just so weird how we need to, like, the biggest, I don't want to say enemy, but it's true, the biggest enemy we have to deal with at times is ourselves and our mind. And that's the most difficult one to fight, because, my brain's not going to step out and like engage me in fisticuffs, but that would make it so much easier if I could keep my brain in shape. But yeah,
It's funny hearing you talk. It's sometimes you have to cosplay your successful self.
Mm-hmm. I said sometimes it's the people who are the worst individuals on the planet, and they just have so much confidence, like certain politicians who won't be named, but the confidence that they have to just never doubting themselves for a second. And then I will literally pull up to a fast food window and I will have to check my order several times before I even speak. And they'll be like, "Yeah, what do you want?" Oh, even though I've come to this restaurant like every week since I've been born, I suddenly don't know what I want. And it'll be like, "No, it's spicy crispy chicken sandwich meal. That's what I want. That's what I came here for. Why am I second guessing the order now?"
I think looking at it a bit like just looking at a description of the rejection sensitivity disorder, I think the thing is that I guess the difference is that on the one hand, imposter syndrome is rooted in you're in some respects you emotionally are quite rational in what when you're looking at your work, but you're being overly critical. But I think that requires a certain degree of rationality in how you're approaching things and thinking almost maybe without so much that it then induces the emotion. Whereas I think the RSD seems to come from the emotion first, from looking at it, and then that likely, because that seems to cover a multitude of things beyond just, are you good at doing work? It seems to be, are you embarrassed in front of people, like standing up in front of people and social situations. So I think clearly it seems like RSD mostly can present itself through different things to end up giving you what so that you suffer from what we would call imposter syndrome, but it's rooted somewhere else. So I guess there's an element of cold-hearted rationality with how to tackle imposter syndrome, assuming you're not suffering from our RSD. That's a good start. But then also, be a bit irrational in the sense of, like, you look at your work, be realistic about your work, but also, as Kennedy said, like, everyone lies on their CVs all the time. Like, and again, this is another huge thing going back to, again, talk about academia. Oh my God, right. If you write science papers, you're always like, we discovered this. We believe this is what is happening. You always have to say, we believe, we suggest this is going on. We think this. Not like, this is the thing. We know it to be this. It's very passive because you're trying to present a theory that you're not trying to say something so grandiose that someone's going to tear it down. And the problem is, and I've then myself and my partner have edited friends' CVs and cover letters for jobs, and I have learned this in job applications. Unfortunately, creative writing helps you a lot with this. When it comes to writing for job applications, you have got to go, no, I can do this. You want to employ me because I'm already doing this. You've got to be, and that element of forcefulness, again, measured amounts of it, is useful both with how you approach, how you consider your own work, how you compare yourself to other people's work, how you can compare your work versus people who are critical of it. Well, if they're critical of it, great, but can they write? I haven't seen their body of work. Then jog on. You're one of a few people who are the vocal minority. And then also, it's good to foster that element of confidence because, again, when you get into a public setting at conventions and talking to people about your work, then they'll go, okay, they like working on this stuff. They are confident about their work. They're confident they can deliver on time. We'll, grab them for the next project. So believing yourself is important. It's just has to be a measured degree of it. Don't let it get out of hand.
I think writing in general demands finding a way to really deal with rejection sensitivity, because rejection sensitivity is oddly, it strikes me as something that's about you're being rejected, and as soon as you make it about the writing, it's I'm not being rejected, my work is being rejected. And you have to find a way, I imagine, um, to kill off those fears that, or those feelings that you're the one who's being rejected, because I can't imagine anyone being able to genuinely survive in a writing field like that if if that's how they feel, if they feel that it's me being rejected and not the work. And it just makes me kind of kerfluffled thinking about it.
I think, yeah, and I think like those who have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, um, I feel it is different in the like the shift in perspective, right? Like rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I feel comes from a place of um you're being rejected outright rather than you don't belong. And I do not want to invalidate it, both of those feelings are extremely valid, especially if you're feeling them in the moment. Um it's just we're more trying to figure out, like to discuss like the two different places of where those come from and how best to deal with them. And so yeah, like it's very, very hard to kind of pull them apart because it's different for everybody. But at the same time, um, and some of the same things will apply to help kind of get over that. But at the same time, um, this where it stems from can be very, very different. So it's a lot of self-reflection and taking a look at yourself and where your feelings are coming from, um and kind of piecing it from there. And like I said before, like you can go back and forth between the two of them, you can have both of them at the same time. All of those are very, very valid. um and so uh yeah, like know that like you still have a place within writing if you have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and you absolutely still do belong here. So we're gonna go and we're gonna kind of move on, and you guys all kind of touched a little bit upon like how to combat imposter syndrome. So I'm not gonna add my stuff until the end, my thoughts on this, because I want you guys to be able to have those points and everything like that, and then I'm gonna talk about some of the things that I've been told and kind of have helped me. So who would like to go and start with that?
Oh man. Well, like I said, sometimes I like to just role play. Imagine that I'm a confident person. I've shared a lot of petty things. I'll share some more. Sometimes I go back to old books I've worked on and I reread old reviews. I mean, I always appreciate, like learning what people think of my books, and I've had my fair share of bad reviews on some books. But then there are times when I'm like, I'll truly doubt the process and I'll doubt what I'm doing, and then I just go back and read when, like when a book was a real big hit. Like I'll reread old posts about Star Trek Adventures when that came out, because that was incredible. It was incredible to get to be there to work on that moment in like Trek and role-playing history for Star Trek Adventures. Um, and sometimes I just kind of grab onto it. Just I and it helps. And I acknowledge that it might not be the healthiest thing to read old reviews constantly. I am definitely a person who's guilty of doom scrolling, where I'm like, oh man, it's a whole post of people making fun of people like me. I really shouldn't read the comments, but I'm gonna. And my brain just sometimes it works better when I'm able to just be like, hey, remember that time when everybody congratulated me on getting to work with on like when I first started working with Onyx Path? Let's reread that old Facebook post, and it's just I think we always focus on like the negative parts of human behavior. We always like, especially our own, and sometimes, as long as it doesn't become a habit, sometimes it's good to just kind of let ourselves feel amazing, to let our egos go up, and the world will check you really quickly. Like if I made a post right now on Facebook that said "World's greatest game designer," everyone else sucks. I guarantee you, within minutes, everyone would be like, "Oh, what about this person, this person, this person?" And, they'll all be amazing. But then there are just times when it's just you and the world's not even there. Like if it's just you at home in your apartment, and let yourself be the queen bee of writing. Let yourself, for a moment, let yourself be the most incredible game designer ever. Even if that never leaves the confines of your apartment. Just feel good, I guess is what I'm going for. Like the world will do its share in bringing you down. So maybe just feel good and enjoy it. And when all said and done, once the book is finally wrapped and it's out to the people's hands, it's out of your hands anyways. So the best thing you can do is just try your best during the process and try to get the book to where it needs to be. And I know, like what everyone else has talked on a lot. If you're part of a team, you were selected to be there, and you're not going to be letting your teammates down. Like, um, if you were chosen to compete on a team, you were chosen. Like, live that up. Be like, yeah, I beat out all these other candidates, and the team will also want you to succeed. So your editors and developers will be very quick to be like, hey, that thing you submitted, it's not quite what I needed. But yeah, just sometimes just live it up, enjoy it. Um, and if you truly are the worst writer ever, then you'll never get picked to be on any teams in the first place. So
So I picked up a habit from a friend of mine on Facebook who has a lot of anxiety and other mental issues. And when she was feeling most stressed, she would literally just post a list of everything she had gotten done that day. So I have evolved that into, first of all, you'll be surprised you got more than you realize done. I mean, sometimes just taking a shower is an accomplishment and you can list it as one. Absolutely. Sometimes just, doing a little bit of research is an accomplishment because it's something you need for that project. So I, on my calendar, will actually write down specifically what I have gotten done in a day. I like to make lists and cross it out. But every month I have, I finished this project. I wrote this book. I read this many books. I cleaned this much of my house, whatever. Anything that made me feel accomplished. And then the second thing that I do is I have also, as I've been a part of different communities and taken in different media online, I have managed to get a hold of, screenshots of Neil Gaiman talking about his imposter syndrome. And so I keep those and I have a folder of those or good things people have said about me, good reviews and stuff. And I'll just go through that folder and I'll just read it. And here's these things people have said about me, things they've enjoyed about my work, and here's these things that people I admire have been through the same feelings I have. And it's just really, all of that is really validating. And generally speaking, by the time I go through my list of things I have accomplished and my list of good things that people have said about me or other people who also experience insecurity or imposter syndrome, usually I'm pretty fired up and I'm ready to get some work done. I can fix it later as long as I just get it down now.
Um, yeah, I have to agree. Like, there's not much more to add. Like, it's just kind of sometimes just get work done is kind of the thing. Like, even writing bad stuff is better than writing none. Once you've got stuff on the page, you can go back and edit it. I do that all the time. And it's just kind of it's just understanding that there are many other factors that are out of your control that will lead to you not getting the breaks. We've already talked about luck. It could be because of whatever's going on in the company, change of direction on things, change of developer. You know, let's be honest, developers have favorites, people they turn to who they know they can get work out of. And that can lead to you not getting picked up for a couple of books on a particular line because that's just how it is. It's not actually anything in particularly personal. It's just how developers work, and that's, you know, that's how this industry operates. Really, is that kind of trust, that level of trust with writers that someone has in their kind of portfolio, as it were. So yeah, and I think the other thing is, and I find this obviously has helped with imposter syndrome, is if you do get into doing, you know, not everyone wants to do this obviously with writing, but like with things like podcasting or streaming or blogging, that doing those things are useful for creating kind of a treadmill of just getting something out there, again, proving you can do the work at your own pace, maybe. But also, there are other avenues for showing that you know your stuff and can develop your confidence, that the fact that you can talk about it in ridiculous depth, whatever the topic or thing is. So all of those things I find help with addressing that imposter syndrome by actually having documented evidence you know your stuff, as well as obviously looking at reviews and feedback.
I've like I said, I've talked about this for a while now, and I've gotten a lot of really good advice from a lot of different people. Some of it works for me, some of it doesn't. Some of it works in certain points for my brain, and some of it just doesn't. But one of the biggest things that I was given was that I struggle with talking about my accomplishments about things, and that comes from a place of being told, oh well, you shouldn't brag about yourself, you shouldn't brag about the things that you do. And there's a difference between bragging and talking about the things that you have accomplished in a way that is both productive but also shows and demonstrates that you know what you're talking about. And so one of the things that I've done to kind of trick my brain, and I still try to do this as much as I can, is to talk about your projects in the context of your team. So like for the longest time with Pip System, I was not the lead developer for the Pip System core book. I was one of the writers. But I still talk about the core book in aspect of the team, and I try to tag the team if I'm ever talking about it as much as I can. With the Pip primers, I try to tag as many of the writers as I can on social media and talk about it from a team aspect, because those wouldn't exist if it wasn't for that team. And it is a way for me to talk about the things that I'm proud of, but also get around the fact that my brain is like, no, you shouldn't be bragging about yourself. This is not good. Because it's now me and everybody else on the project and not just me. And so that's really helped me to be able to confidently talk about the things that I've worked on, but it also helps all of the other writers. Because now they are also getting their voices out. They may not be on social media, or they may not be the best at social media, or they don't like to talk on social media. And so helping to get them out there as well is also very helpful. Some of the other things is supporting other writers, whether you worked on projects with them or not. I feel like when you are supporting others within the community, you are now becoming a part of that community, and community helps. And so when you feel connected, especially since we are mostly remote, feeling connected with other people and promoting the stuff that they do, even if you have no stake in it, whether it's successful or not, can help you feel more a part of something bigger. And I feel like that personally has helped me as well. And then the other thing too, that I have been told, and please take this with, I am coming at this as the perspective of a woman, is that I should conduct myself with the confidence of a mediocre white man. And like, there are people who have not had as many accomplishments as I have, who are out there promoting themselves as way bigger of a deal than I do myself. And that's kind of helped me with conventions. Like, conventions is where I feel that the most. At a convention, I have to be extremely confident in myself, because otherwise they will tear me down in panels and workshops and stuff like that. So those are all of the things that I have been told that have kind of helped me. The one thing I'm going to try, though, is I have a whole bunch of crowns. So when I'm home alone and I'm writing and I cannot, like, Kenny, that was great. I'm like, I'm going to wear a crown when I write, because I think that'd be awesome.
It works. I mean, it really does.
All right. We're coming up at the end of our show, and so what I would like for everyone to do is I'm going to go around, and everyone is going to share either like the biggest takeaway that they've learned, or something that they want others, that like that's the most important part that you want other people to take away from this. Okay? So, and then we'll go into everybody's social medias and all of that fun stuff. So, who would like to go first?
The bane of every creative is being asked if he wants to go first. I guess I'll go. I learned, like, I always learn how, other people go through what I go through, and it's I know it seems weird, like, talking about imposter syndrome at great lengths, but learning how other people experience it is always what interests me the most, and learning what also people's little micro triggers might be. And again, it's something that I think that I've learned in 20 years that I think might be helpful, is really just, at the end of the day, it's all words on a page. And it's all up to the reader to take whatever we write, whatever we draw, whatever we edit. They're the ones that are going to be to determine if it's great. And like, just like how, like, I've had friends who will tell me, yeah, I really hated Guardians of the Galaxy, worst movie of the MCU by far. And I'll just be shocked, because I'm like, how can that be a true statement? But just when it comes to writing, like, you might fire on all cylinders and put out your best work and someone hates it. You might struggle to get something past the line and someone will love it. And so I guess just what I learned from my fellow writers is that it's a very nebulous business, saying that, going up against your own head, trying to win, but it can be done. And I think everybody needs that hope. Like, like they say, lack of hope is the real death of us all. It really is just, what I've learned from like other people. It's just like, with like Chris, because I'm more familiar with Chris's work. Just the fact that you have an incredibly challenging day job, and then you're also creating all these awesome hits. And then we streamed together. We were in an Iron Kingdoms game for a while. And so just knowing that, like, you experience the same hurdles that I go through really helps me with understanding, like, hey, like, there's a chance for me, that I can, beat my own demons and create stuff. And it's, I'm not saying that, that I'm not going to be working on My Little Pony this weekend and frustrated and throwing, like, I have a little beanbag that I throw at the wall sometimes, just because I'm trying to get it to bounce back at me. This whole podcast, I'm just incredibly childish and churlish, and that's me. But no, it's just knowing that other people go through what I go through, and it may take 1,000 more of just talking to people and realizing that other people go through what I go through, and it's very normal to have imposter syndrome. But there'll be times when I'll succumb to it and just be like, no, I am objectively the world's worst creative person on the entire planet. And again, it's just the next day, it's, hey, you got to pick up that pen, you got to put it to paper. Somebody is wanting you to write these words, and it's up to you to do it. And there's always hope. I mean, I'm able to do it, and I know that, and I've had a lot of help to get there too. Like we talked about teams earlier, and a great team is just phenomenal. But yeah, so I guess just what I'll say to people out there who listen to this podcast, what people have told me, and it's like, I believe in you. Like, I believe that you're all great writers, and we're all going to do amazing things together.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, who is next?
What did I learn from this? It's always validating to hear that other people feel the same way that I do. It always helps to know that other people struggle too, because then I don't feel alone. I guess the biggest thing that I have learned from this is, there's a huge difference between writing a book, a novel on your own, and writing in the role playing community where, like Crystal said, everything is a team. And there's just such an amazing sense of community here in the role playing writing field that you don't always find everywhere else. And that's a really valuable thing. And that is probably why I find myself drawn more and more to that community.
Awesome. All right, Chris.
I'm trying to think. It's because it's late here. My brain is mostly crapped out and said a lot. Yeah, I think it's just clear that it doesn't matter where you come in with writing. It's everyone, generally experiences it at some point to a lesser or greater degree, and it is going to hit us all. Case of talking about it, and I think, and it's good that I guess there is more people talking about it, and maybe while social media in this day and age is a blight in some respects by creating a false sense of reality out there, that the fact is also, thanks to social media, we also learn the fact that we can actually talk about this, because I don't know how much of this was ever spoken about back in, the early 2000s or even before then. So, and it's just kind of reach out, and, people will likely have the same experiences and reinforce that you are actually doing the right things. And I think just generally just write. Yeah, so essentially just reach out, and people have advice, and the best thing to prove that you are not an imposter is just to keep writing. Just get stuff out there, whether it's self-published or on your blog, or even if you're trying to get into gaming, do if you like streaming, obviously, or podcasting, maybe also look at those. Are a great way of kind of getting away from the writing, but still exploring what you love in a different medium. Podcasting is like, everyone seems to do it, but yeah, just explore it that way, and also just play some games. That's the other thing. Just like, find other ways to get away from the thing that is seemingly your barrier to producing the work.
Okay. So I think my biggest takeaway, and I think the whole point of this whole podcast series, is that if you're part of a community, and whether you're playing games, whether you're just a fan and collect games, because let's be honest, how many Kickstarters have we backed where we're never going to play the game, but the art was really cool?
Way too many.
So, like, whether you're there, whether you have imposter syndrome about getting started into writing, whether you're curious about writing, whether you're just getting started, whether you're in there and just struggling with this, you are all part of this community, and we have all been in your shoes at some point, and we have all done very similar things, including backing many Kickstarters where we're never going to play the game, but the art is just so pretty, or the concept is just so cool. And so, like, just know that you have people out here who support you and are willing to help support you, or promote your things, reach out, make connections. That's the glory of social media, is that you can connect with people over long distances. Okay, so we are going to wrap this up. So I would like for everybody to share their social medias where people can find you. And let's go. I'm just going to go right down the line as to what we have. So Kennedy, you're up first.
Hey, you can find me most places. My gamer tag, my Twitter handle, and a lot of other places that I use for fans is JKMyth. And if you ever want me to just post what I think to be some really, really good meme content, that's my Twitter account. But every so often, I will talk about game design and politics. And yeah, that's just where to find me. And I'm also on a couple of live streams. The most recent one is The Voyages of with the Rook and Rasp crew, where we play Star Trek Adventures. And I get to play a lovely Saurian doctor who really is trying to learn how people work and is complaining at all times about being too cold on the ship.
Amazing. All right, Chris?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Chris_Ether. So that's Chris with a K though. So KRIS_ETHER. Obviously, you can also find me on. You can follow everything on Darker Days Radio, of course. So that's www.darker-days.org. My personal website is Christopher-Handley.com. I don't even know my own website. Yeah, that's the one. It's Dash, yeah. Obviously, from those you'll find links to other things like Instagram and stuff, because if I'm not writing and I'm not playing games or podcasting, then I am painting toy soldiers. I've not streamed anything of late because I have been busy and in a hectic last 6 months. I would like to get back into streaming games, but you're just gonna have to bloody wait for that. Yeah, so that's everything.
My website is michelele.net, and if there is a social media that I'm on, I am the other Michelle Lee. I'm not the famous one. I'm the other one.
Awesome. And so my personal social media is, you can follow me at most social media for Body and Soul 152. You can also find links to all of my social media at thegeekypanda.com. Okay, so I want to thank Darker Days Radio for hosting this podcast series, and you can find all of their information. You can email them at darkerdaysradio@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/darkerdaysradio. All other social media is at Darker Days Radio. We're on Instagram, Tumblr, on Tabletop, YouTube, Twitch, and our Discord, which will all have links down there. So, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and we will see everyone later.